Hi guys, welcome back to the Genius Nook. Today's one is gonna be one that is so dear to my heart, and if I can convince you by the end of this video to be as in love or be willing to enter this loving relationship that I have with Zatanna, then I've done myself justice. First of all, some of you guys might not be aware of who Zatanna is, okay? Now, Zatanna kind of came around in the 1960s, particularly when DC was trying to make a shift away from, not away, but going back to, its magical roots. At the time in the 1960s, science fiction was all of the rage. Science intertwined with heroism, again, was all the rage. And they wanted to find a way to bring DC back a little bit to its magical roots. And that's where Zatanna, the daughter of Giovanni Zattara, a character who was introduced a lot earlier, as this famed magician who could warp reality in different forms and different ways. She became his daughter, and that is how she was introduced to the universe, okay? So a little bit of a fact file on Zatanna, if you're not aware. So number one, she is a magician. She comes from a long line of performers, including her father, Giovanni Zattara, who is a super famous magician and performer. And so therefore, after he passed away, unfortunately, she then takes on this mantle and is a performer. And that is actually her day job, okay? So whilst she is saving the world and, informing the Justice League about supernatural or magical level threats, she is also performing every night to different crowds, okay, different magic tricks. So she is a performer to her core. She grew up in Gotham, and in many different comic book lines and in many different iterations, she serves as Batman's childhood friends. This can be confusing because I know a lot of people's first interactions with the character Zatanna is through the Young Justice series, and in the Young Justice series, she is a member of the Young Justice. Her father's still present and around for most of it, okay? And Batman is significantly much older than her, so they position her next to Dick Grayson. But she is actually probably more closer in relation to Bruce Wayne's Batman, and they kind of grew up together, okay? She's technically not completely human. She also, partly because of her mother, descends from a line of humans, or it's different species of human called Homo Magi, which naturally have very innate magical abilities, which allows her to carry out her magic. And how her magic works is she uses a form of linguistic magic, where she inverts the way she speaks her words, and that is how, or imbues her words with powers. I don't know if I've done this recently. It might have been in my Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood video, but I was kind of talking a little bit about magical power systems and this idea of a conduit versus a magical object. So the sense that a conduit is something to funnel magical energy into so that it's streamlined out one way. So think of it like a prism. You have prisms over a filter. So let's say you have white light, and then and white light contains all of the different wavelengths of light, okay? It has red, green, yellow, blue. And then you apply a filter because you specifically want to get only red light out, okay? So that filter absorbs all of the different types of magic and only emits red light, okay? So I kind of think of conduits in that form, and I think her way of inverting words serves as a conduit for her magical energy. She is able to imbue these words with magical energy by inverting the words. Now, if some of you are already ahead of the game and have tuned into some of the Justice League Dark editions, which I will be coming to, don't worry, very shortly, you might have already known that a part of the reason why was illustrated and explained that there is something called the other world and this other side, which is where a lot of the magic that is present on Earth and in our universe comes from. And a way to hide from the other side and the other realm is to use magical objects and conduits and things like that. So a very important part to talk about Zatanna's character and her psychology and the things that really interest me and the things that her characters are trying to portray is this idea of the cost and ethics of power and this whole idea of performer versus person. One very significant moment in Zatanna's journey, and I think something that shifts her more towards the mainstream spotlight, was the death of her father, Giovanni Zattara, in Swamp Thing number 50, okay? Which was quite unique. Number one, Swamp Thing number 50 and the Swamp Thing era is a horror comic, okay? It is DC's horror line. And so positioning Zatanna and Zattara and making an important part of the story be present there, okay, really shifts the perspective of how we view magic, okay? Magic isn't this like fairyland idealistic thing of performers and taking bunnies out of the hat, but it's real serious stuff. Now, Zatanna's father died saving the world from this supernatural cult threat. There was this cult that was trying to unleash this crazy amount of darkness in the world, and Giovanni Zattara gave up his life, okay, by absorbing some of those magic into him. He dies willingly, and Zatanna sees the whole thing. This then shifts her perspective of how she views magic a lot and how she interacts with magic. It's no longer fun. It's no longer this fun thing you could do to warp reality. It is something serious and holds a lot of weight, and she lost her father because of it. Okay, and now this always allows us, through Zatanna's character, to begin to view her through this lens of this question of what is the cost of power. You know, what are you willing to sacrifice and what are you willing to give up? Which I think a lot of magic users kind of become a question for, which I love in most series. There are different comic book lines that kind of illustrate the point I'm talking about of how important her character is, of discussing the cost and ethics of having power, particularly within the magic world of DC. Number one is the infamous identity crisis. The identity crisis is a famous Justice League story. Essentially, I think, who was it? Oh, my brain. Okay, a member of the Justice League, and I really want to say Plastic Man, but do not quote me on this, okay? His wife ends up dying, okay? And it becomes this mystery that spouses and people close to members of the Justice League end up dying, and they're trying to figure out who. It basically eventually comes out that Zatanna mind wipes a bunch of villains to stop them from committing the crime again. And in doing so, she had also mind wiped Batman, okay? And then this creates this ethical question, this ethical dilemma, okay? Is what Zatanna did correct? You know, Identity Crisis serves as one of the very moments in the Justice League where they present the audience with a moral, ethical dilemma. You know, is it okay to wipe a villain's memory and mind to stop them from committing a crime again? Or is that a step too far? Are we taking power too far? This eventually corrupts and destroys her relationship with Batman temporarily, but then again, it then positions her power, her usage of her power, as always something to be of an ethical questioning, okay? And that is why I truly love Zatanna's character. She, in a lot of the different comics, in the way she interacts with magic and the questions her magic allows us to ask, creates this opportunity for the reader to discuss and think about is, if you have the ability at your fingertips to warp and invert reality, how far should you be willing to go? How many people are worth saving in expense of wiping somebody's mind or getting rid of somebody completely or changing the whole direction of history? It's questions that we see again and again across different forms of heroism, but I think Zatanna and her use of magic and her questioning of magic displays this in a really, really interesting way. Of course, I am absolutely fascinated with the relationship and her loss of her father, personally, because I think I am drawn to stories that describe and illustrates a person's battle with grief. And I do think because her father taught her magic, her father taught her everything she knows, her relationship with her father is close, and how it intertwines with her life as a performer as well. And all of those really interesting mixes of different things, I think is a really good illustration of how grief can affect someone. I think the loss of her father made her more responsible, but it made her less, you know, it took something away from her that I'm struggling to articulate and describe. And that whole dynamic, I mean, heroes lose people all the time. I do think each hero is a different lens into seeing grief and loss and love from a very different perspective and how they react to it. I mean, I think I spoke a little bit about it when I was talking about the very first like super comic book related-esque video I did when I was talking about Batman and how grief and loss is something that powers him to do what he needs to do. I think rather than powering her, in a sense, I think the grief and loss of her father makes her question what she does and why she does and if she should be doing what she's doing, okay? And there's a real weight to her magic that is contrasted against a lot of different characters that she meets. And we cannot talk about Zatanna without talking about, again, another one of my favorites, John Constantine. Now, John Constantine and Zatanna's stories are often very intertwined because they were in a relationship, and I think they're like DC's poster child for a toxic couple. And you know what it is? I was talking to my friend the other day. This is such a side note. And I was like, why do we have such a fascination for reading toxic relationships? Like, why are we drawn to relationships that are naturally, like, not very healthy? And I love Zatanna and Constantine, okay? I love them when they're in a relationship. I love them when they're not in a relationship. I love them when they're fighting. I love them when they're together. I just love them. I don't know. They do something to me, okay? But Constantine is a character, an example of a character of somebody who has been very, very burdened by magic, the cost of magic, the ethics of magic and use of power and the occult, okay? And how far somebody is willing to go for power. And he's absolutely burdened by it. And he absorbs all of this guilt. And it causes him to act in certain ways and navigate certain situations quite differently. And I think Constantine and Zatanna, the reason why their relationship is so interesting for many different reasons is because they act as very intentional mirrors of each other. You know, Zatanna has experienced loss. She feels the weight of magic, but instead her way of approaching it and interacting with it feels quite light, okay? It feels quite positive. It feels quite weighty and serious, but not something that demeans her and corrupts her soul, whereas Constantine is corrupting. You know, this guilt weighs heavy on him, and it affects every decision he makes within relationships, within the powers he decides to interact with, and the way he decides to go about interacting with the world. And so their interactions to me are always quite fascinating because it tells you a lot about how each character can reflect to the cost and the ethics of power and magic. And it's so interesting. I do want to say, because I was having this argument with someone, I said, Zatanna is a beast, okay, in terms of magic. She is an absolute beast. And I also think another very interesting perspective I love about Zatanna and the way her character is explored is this idea of performer versus person. And I feel like different heroes explore this in different ways. When you Superman, Superman versus Clark Kent, Batman versus Bruce Wayne, and they all have different reflections and sides to them that allow us to interact with this idea of dual identity. But Zatanna's one's quite different because she is a public figure. So everybody who knows or watches her shows knows that she is also a hero at the same time. It's not necessarily a secret identity in terms of her heroism, but there is this idea of the performer versus Zatanna the person. Zatanna that puts on magic performances and is very well endowed with magical knowledge and is there to save the day from any occult occurrences in the world of DC, versus the person who is, again, this whole idea of cost and ethics of power and magic, weighed down by the loss of her father, weighed down from this massive, huge responsibility. And this idea of performer versus person is something I feel like is subtly explained and introduced and illustrated in many different Zatanna comics. I think the reason why I love Zatanna so much is because she feels, despite all of the power she has, despite all of the things she's been through, she feels so undeniably human. I feel so connected to her character and the way that she goes about things and the decisions she makes. And she has this loneliness about her. Again, this idea of loss of power, loss of her father, but also this like distance from power that I think she grapples with a lot, of trying to understand of where do I fit in this world and who am I when I'm not Zatanna. However, she's always Zatanna. She's always this homo magi. She's always this magician. And what does that mean when those things go away? Like, who is Zatanna behind all of these things? And I think this idea of person versus performer is another theme that we see illustrated throughout her character. And if the DC universe wants to just give her light, take her and hold her under the wing, you have a powerhouse of a character with such in-depth storylines and unlimited magical capabilities that is untapped. I personally would love to see Zatanna go back to the horror world and magic to lean back into this horror element. I'm also one of those people that would love to see an absolute Zatanna. But if you've heard all of my spiel and you're like, yes, frothing at the mouth, what should I read? How can I become more obsessed with Zatanna? How can I join this cult with you? Okay, let me tell you what Zatanna comics I would recommend you guys to read to get into this amazing, wonderful character. My comic book recommendations as it pertains to Zatanna is, number one, okay, she is initially introduced, I think in one of the very early Justice League comics, and she's basically looking for her father after her father disappears, okay? But if you want to hear the story and see her experience with how she lost her father, go and read Swamp Thing number 50. Swamp Thing comic book line is amazing. It is DC horror at its finest. It's some of my favorite pieces of DC horror, and I love how it starts introducing and mixing the world of magic and the occult with the horror world. I think they're very interlinked, very chilling tales of Sabrina. Is that what that show was called? Anyway, but the first and most famous edition of Zatanna is Zatanna Paul Dini's run. So this is a 16-issue run because unfortunately it got cut short. But you get to dive deep into the psyche and also understand really well how Zatanna's powers work. In this run, it kind of is quite episodic. So it feels like, when you watch a cartoon when you're a kid, like Teen Titans or Young Justice or any of the sort, right? I've maybe not Avatar The Last Airbender, like Danny Phantom, any of those kind of things, okay? It's like this idea that each episode is its own adventure, but there are things that happen across the episodes that link, okay? And allow you to explore and understand a lot of the character, and there are translating storylines that follow each other as they go along. I will give you a warning that when you get to issue number 16, you're like, where has everything gone? But the issue was unfortunately cut short. But there are a lot of fun adventures. You get to learn a lot about Zatanna and her powers. You get to learn a little bit more about the magical world. You get to meet Zachary, her very annoying but kind of hot cousin, okay? And you get to interact with Zatanna in a really fun format that I think is quite interesting, okay? Hello, editing Jessie here, and I filmed this video at the beginning of February, and since then I have read Zatanna all in, and I'd be a bad person if I didn't come and include this in my list of recommendations. So this is why I'm sitting here makeupless in my hoodie with my messy bed in the background. That's how much I care about you guys, okay? So Zatanna All In is the most recent Zatanna solo series in the current DC universe at this point in time. And Zatanna all in the world of DC, the magic is doing strange things. There's a shift, it's on the fritz, okay? And there's a lot of ancient forces at play that Zatanna has to confront. But most importantly, in this comic book, okay, she is confronting some of the ethical decisions she has made using her powers over the years. The things that I touched upon in this video, talking about some of my favorite things that her character forces us to confront, I think this run does this so well. So I will absolutely recommend the Zatanna all in run. After you've read the Paul Dini run, please check it out. Please stream it. I need more Zatanna. Please. Okay. So there's that one. There is an Elseworlds title, and if you're unfamiliar what Elseworld means in terms of DC Comics, so you have your main canon, okay? These are things that happen within the main timeline. But an Elseworld titles are things that happen in, let's say, an alternate universe, and this allows writers to become really creative when they're interacting with the different comics. So a good example of Elseworld titles is the Absolute Universe going on right now. They are their own self-contained universe, and anything that happens in those universes aren't really impacted on the main timeline. It just allows writers again this opportunity to explore the story. You have the Batman Who Laughs is a Elseworld title. That one's really good. You have Elseworlds title that is just like, you know, in like a medieval era, a Justice League of the medieval era and what that looks like without all of those technologies. So Elseworlds titles are really cool. And a very good Elseworlds title that I think is so creative in terms of the artwork and storyline is Bring the House Down, Zatanna. So in this story, we kind of dive a little bit deeper into the psyche of Zatanna, and we meet a Zatanna who is still a performer, who's still a magician, but distances herself completely from the world of magic. And she is being confronted by her past, okay, the past that she tried so desperately to run away from in her attempt of doing magic shows, okay, and what that means for her, okay. So we meet a Zatanna that is less experienced and has less dived into the world of magic. Remember that I said before that a very big part of her character is learning the cost and ethics of magic and how she chooses to take that on and how she chooses to carry on her father's name and what that means to her. And in Bring the House Down, Zatanna, we meet a Zatanna that ran away from all of that responsibility and decided to turn away. Not without bad reason, but it is a different type of Zatanna and explores her through a different lens. But I again think it brings you deeper into that psyche that I think is so interesting. Then, okay, Zatanna in a more mature, realized form, I think, is in this Justice League Dark. Now, this is the second video in a row that I've mentioned the Justice League Dark. I think is it 2016 or 2011? I can't remember, but it's the Justice League. I'll put it up here. Justice League Dark with Wonder Woman. That one, I honestly think it might be one of my favorite comics because I talk about that so much. So in this Justice League Dark, okay, we have all of the magic in the world when we're first introduced to this comic book line is gone on the fritz, okay? And Wonder Woman has approached Zatanna and a bunch of different magic users across the DC universe to help her figure this thing out. You see Swamp Thing, you see Man-Bat, you see Constantine, of course, Wonder Woman, and it's just such a great blend of the magical universe in one amazing comic book line, and Zatanna really does shine. You see her as this very confident source of magical wisdom within this universe. You see her powers at a great extent. You see her interactions and her relationships with other people. I adore this comic book line, and I definitely think that once you kind of understand Zatanna as a character by reading the other two comics, you need to see her in action in a team, okay? I have mentioned a couple of other comics across this, and Zatanna does join the Justice League, like the main Justice League, a couple times. She comes in and out, but I think her in Justice League Dark, I promise you guys, if, you know, James Gunn announces a Justice League Dark movie, series, whatever, and Zatanna and Wonder Woman aren't a duo together, I'm gonna cry because they are so good. But nonetheless, I honestly think, again, these comic books and these stories are just a really great way to explore emotions and things that are really difficult in our day-to-day world. I love Zatanna. I think Zatanna's DC secret weapon, not only because she's an absolute magical powerhouse, but because her story is so interested and detailed, and she just serves, I think, and could be a very good opportunity to serve as an amazing anchor piece for the world of magic in DC. Please do let me know, what are your thoughts of Zatanna? Are there any Zatanna comics that I'm missing? You guys guys, can I just say something? Okay, I know I'm waffling, it's my ADHD, but I have enjoyed so much making these type of videos and comments, specifically on YouTube, these longer form videos illustrating some of my ramblings that are going on in my head and some of the kind of deeper things that I consider about these characters, because of the way you guys interact in the comments and the way you guys relate with me. There are so much beautiful dialogue. I have people bringing new perspectives to me, recommending things to other people, having really healthy debates, and it just gives me so much warmth because I sometimes think the internet can be so trigger happy, being like, I don't agree with this, and then it's just like, you're so dumb. But in this time it's like, okay, wait, I disagree, but these are like the reasons why I illustrate my thoughts, and I really think you should read this comic book line because you will completely get what I'm saying. And I just love that it's this healthy exchange of ideas about characters and people that we love so much. And if you're brand new to the world of DC and you're just kind of unsure of where to start, first of all, start with all of those Zatanna comics. I think they're amazing. I don't think you need much foreground I think this video and the knowledge I've given you in this video is enough to go into any of these comic book lines if you are brand new. But also, I hopefully think I'm curating a safe space, and I'm so thankful for you guys for engaging and giving me all of those beautiful, long, detailed comments and essays. So please do share your opinion about Zatanna as a character, and also any comics that you think are interesting. My next video is gonna be on Bob's Burgers. Okay, I've done an anime video, I've done 3 comic book videos. I need to do like a little up. But yes, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you next time. If you are only here for the comic book stuff, like she's only here for the zip line. I will definitely be making a Superman one to complete my Trinity run of how to get into Superman if you're a complete beginner. But if you're brand new to the world of Zatanna, this one's for you guys. Bye.